Back a year ago.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. Super excited to be joined by Don Tess. Don is a beer writer and consultant known globally as the Don of Beer. He has been active in craft beer for over 25 years and has famously sampled and written tasting notes on over 25,000 different beers. Don has also written for magazines and presented on beer in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Ukraine, and Singapore. Nobody in those countries thinks his jokes are funny. He said that. He wrote that. I did not. I'm sure it's not true.
It is
so,
true.
So let's get into it. Don, welcome to the Beer Bound Podcast.
Well, thank you, Andy. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you here.
I love talking about beer. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Well, I gave a very small introduction. So Don, can you enlighten us a little bit more? Tell us about yourself, your interest in beer, your connection with the beer world. Who are you?
Boy, who am I? I do a lot of things. I write about beer. I'm involved with a beer import agency. I'm involved with beer export agency. I'm just passionate about beer. I'm anywhere and everywhere where beer is found, and as I'm sure you know, beer is found everywhere in the world now. So that's where I am.
Import export agency. Explain that a little bit more.
I have a import. Well, so I used to practice law. I retired from that about 6 years ago. That has nothing to do with my story. I don't know why I said that, but
it's interesting, though.
But around 10 years ago, I was just a little bit frustrated. The beer industry was not as developed as it is now, and I'd read about all these interesting beers from around the world that I wasn't able to get. I just wanted to try them, and so started a beer import agency. Really, not so much as a business, but just so that I could legally get beer that I wanted to try, and then make it available for sale for anybody else who wanted to try it. And then I'm losing track of time because of COVID, but I think 4 or 5 years ago, helped start a beer export agency. It's unrelated. It's related but unrelated. It's a separate business. It's just helping Canadian companies. So my wife and I, we just love to travel. We've been to, probably 30 countries and like to take several trips a year. We're fortunate to be able to do that. But every time we travel and we go to, beer stores or beer bars, you see American craft beer everywhere, but you don't see Canadian craft beer. And, I'm patriotic. I cheer for Team Canada, and that frustrated me. So started a beer export agency to maybe change that, or at least help change that. And in fact, just today, sent a full container. The truck came to pick up a full container of beer going to Sweden. So
wow.
So that's a big win for us today.
That's really cool. So you're joining us. You live in Alberta, correct?
Yeah, correct.
In Calgary?
Calgary. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Is that you're born and raised Albertan?
Born and raised in Saskatoon.
And then
next door. Moved here in mid 90s. But yeah, I mean, to go back to your original question, most people probably know me as a beer writer, which I've been doing for, I've lost track, over 20 years. Let's just say over 20 years. And so yeah, I write for various. I'm a old school guy. I like print publications. I do write for some websites, but I generally like print. I like to read print publications, and I like to write for print publications.
Well, I'm excited to get more into your career in beer writing, Don, in a sec. But very interested about a little bit to touch more on import and exporting, just because I know you're probably aware. Certainly more than me, just how complicated it can often be to get beer shipped into a country like Canada and also to ship it out. Typically, our biggest trading partner is the United States, and shipping, we do have free trade agreement with the US, but that doesn't always work with shipping alcohol. It's very difficult to find Canadian craft beer in the US and vice versa. So Can you tell me some challenges that you faced? Is it easy? Was it easy for you to send that shipment to Sweden? How does your business work in terms of importing and exporting in this sort of delicate world of alcoholic trade?
I think that's fair to say that obviously alcohol is regulated. It's generally speaking, it's regulated. There are some countries that don't regulate it, but the vast majority of countries regulate it, some harder than others. You mentioned the United States, and I must confess, I've not sold one drop of beer to the United States. It is extremely difficult, even to send. Typically, buyers want to try the beer before they will buy it. And I have had some interested buyers in the United States, but even sending the samples for them to taste is very, very difficult. You actually need to go through a licensed importer. And even when you have that, the courier companies are so used to being told they can't do it, they don't do it. I could just the most ridiculous stories of you send some beer samples with all the required documents, and then you keep a set of the documents because you know that the courier company is going to ask for them again, and sure enough, they ask for them again. So you scan them in, you email them to them, and they say everything's fine, and then your doorbell rings and it's your package returned. It happens all the time. It's frustrating, really, really frustrating. But then, other countries, Sweden is a pretty good one. We've had quite a lot of success there. And you're in Ontario, correct?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
So their alcohol retailing is like the LCBO. It is a monopoly, which has its pluses and minuses. And a lot of people badmouth the LCBO, for example, but there are pluses and minuses to it, honestly. And so as a vendor selling into the Swedish monopoly, it's actually quite nice because I find one buyer. I need to convince the buyer to buy the beer, and then I load up the container, and the truck picks it up today, and I have to wait like 90 days to get paid for it. But also it's the government. Of course, the government's going to pay me, right? I don't have to worry. My bad debt risk is very low on that. So, you know, the world is large, and so and to be honest, this export business is a part-time thing, and so we pick and choose the markets that we wish to work with. So Sweden's a good one for us.
One customer is a lot better than dealing with distributors and private
Yeah.
customers and everything. Yeah, of
But
course.
but it's fun. It's actually a little bit of fun. We have to do a Swedish compliant label for them. So I've learned a little bit of Swedish, and by little bit I mean I can name the ingredients of beer in Swedish. And I know how to say recycling, for example, and allergens and things like that. But and then as I mentioned, my wife and I, we love to travel, and so they have an annual beer festival in Sweden near the end of September, and haven't gone yet. Looking to maybe go this year, but if not, maybe next year, and then I'll actually know people there, know beer people there, right? So. Yeah.
Don, what about the opposite way? How much importing do you do? That's obviously a tricky game dealing with Canadian regulations. I mean, I know Alberta is more open. It's a more open province than my own in Ontario, but is that, how easy is it? When I think about Ontario, it's very rare that you find any American craft beer, certainly in our beer stores or the LCBO, these two entities that basically by and large have the monopoly on retail, and occasionally you might be able to find something in a bar, but it is very rare. What about Alberta, like dealing with imports to the province? How does that work?
Yeah, so we technically operate across Canada, and we have actually sold beer in every province of Canada and every territory of Canada. The way I always explain it when I'm sourcing beer from abroad is you should really think of, in terms of beer import into Canada, you should really think of Canada as 13 little countries. Even if I had a buyer in Saskatchewan and a buyer in Alberta, it would be difficult for me to ship the beer together. That's really two separate shipments of beer for regulatory reasons, and that makes it difficult economically speaking. Obviously, when you ship larger quantities, the logistics costs are make more sense, and I can't do that because of various work. And I'm painting in broad strokes here. There are some exceptions and things that you can do, but like I said, with export, with the import, there's pluses and minuses to every of the 13 Canadian markets. Alberta likes to and can say truly that it is the most free market. I think a lot of people equate that as being the best market, and I would argue that point. I think that there are pluses and minuses to the Alberta market. It is free in the sense that you can import pretty much any beer into Alberta. The government doesn't question that, whereas for Ontario, the LCBO, the only way you get beer into the LCBO is to go through their tender process with tasting panels and lab analysis. So the government decides what's sold at the LCBO, and that doesn't happen in Alberta. But commercially speaking, dealing again with one buyer, that's quite nice with the LCBO. The beer store operates differently. You can get any beer into the beer store. You just have to pay their fees, which are very, very high. Basically, you have to be a big brewer. You pay a big listing fee, and then you have to pay a fee for every beer store that the beer is available in. And then a few years ago, in Ontario, grocery stores were permitted to sell beer, but all that beer is sourced either through the LCBO or the beer store. So the beer store and the LCBO are still the gates. And then Quebec is even worse than the LCBO to deal with. You have to go through a Quebec licensed agent, and then all the other provinces and territories are somewhere in between. And again, I would say there's pluses and minuses to every single province. The rules are what the rules are, and you deal with it. And I always say that hard is my friend when it comes to business, because if it were easy, nobody would need my services. So hard is my friend.
I like that. Hard is my friend. Explain a little bit more what you do with importing. Is it mostly importing other provincial beer to Alberta, or do you do any international stuff?
The business started as an international business, but as I'm sure there's been a trend towards supporting local businesses, which is great. I support local as well. And so we still do import beer from, Britain, America, all that sort of thing. But there's been a focus now more on so we sell some beers from, Ontario and BC and Alberta, and we sell some Alberta beers in BC and Manitoba, that sort of thing. And we even sell some Alberta beer in Alberta. So we're full service in terms of representing breweries across Canada.
So how do you pick and choose which particular breweries or which beers are of interest to you in order to represent? Is it typically them coming to you? Is it you doing a bit of scouting to find individuals to work with? How does that work?
It's a bit of both. Certainly we get cold calls all the time. But as I mentioned, the whole business started because I'm a beer geek and I love beer. And so if there's a beer I want to try and get, then we try and get it. And we get probably way more rejection than we get acceptance, but that's the nature of the business. And that also has evolved over the years. It used to be that the classic beer we represent, for example, Hofbrauhaus in Alberta, classic German beer, and you bring that in and people loved it because that was the epitome of German beer. But as the market has evolved, people now look at Untapped and they pick beers not so much on history and reputation, but on is it hazy and is it pink and is it slushy, and what's the Untapped rating and all that. So and don't get me wrong, there are people who still drink Hoff. There are people who the market has become much more fractured. I think that there are the people who like the classic beers, and there are the people who like the next new shiny thing, and all that's cool. Consumer is never wrong. And so we just need to figure out what it is they like, and what we bring into the market.
It's difficult to be super interested personally in one of those sides. We sort of like to say you're either a beer experimenter or a beer traditionalist, or you find yourself somewhere in the middle. But then when you're running an enterprise such as yourself, or maybe you own a craft brewery, well, who cares if you're a beer traditionalist? The flavors of the month are what the consumer wants. So too bad. You have to go with where the trends kind of go.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Well, maybe take us back a little bit, Don. Can you explore a little bit with me why beer is so interesting to you, where that came from in your life? Was that something you've always been quite keen on? What is it that beer really does for you, and what's the story behind it?
There was a time I actually didn't like beer at all. When I was in law school, I didn't drink at all. When my law school friends find out what I do now, they're all shocked. But when I moved to Calgary, Big Rock was big at the time. I tried a traditional, which was very different from anything I'd ever had before. Prior to that, I just had the typical mass market lagers and didn't really enjoy them. And so Big Rock Traditional was eye-opening for me. There was another brewery at the time here called Brew Brothers that has since closed, unfortunately. But they made a beer called Black Pilsner, and that's the one I point to as being kind of my gateway beer, because it kind of blew my mind that was so dark, and yet it had these light, delicate, biscuity flavors. And that was the first time, when I had Big Rock Traditional, for example, I liked it and it tasted good. But when I had the Black Pilsner, that was the first time I tasted a beer and could, I can taste biscuits, I can taste raisins, I could actually enunciate what I was tasting. And so I was fortunate enough to meet the owners and start talking to them about it, ask them where these flavors come from. And then that was the beginning of the end for me in terms of going a deep dive. And why I like writing about beer now is I'm uber beer geek. I just love I was just reading an article today about the different aroma compounds that can come from different barley varieties. So not different malt types, but barley varieties: Copeland, Metcalf, and I love that stuff. I read that stuff and I just get so excited, and then I can't wait to taste the beer where I know it's made with Copeland, and can I taste the things that I just read about? And then I'll try and find a beer made with Metcalf, and can I taste the things that I just read about there? And I love that stuff.
Cool. Have you done any home brewing yourself, Don?
No, I've helped a couple of friends homebrew. I think beer at its finest is art, and the same way I would never try and paint a Picasso. I'll leave that to Picasso. I think I should leave brewing to people who are truly gifted at it. And there are people who, to use my painting example, of course, there are people who paint at home, and that's a lot of fun. And so I have nothing against home brewers, and it can be fun. But for me personally, I'm an art lover. I like looking at Picassos. I'm not going to paint one, and I like drinking beer, and I'm not going to brew one.
More of a patron, maybe.
I'm a patron. Yes, a patron of the arts.
That's great. Yeah, we definitely need a lot of patrons for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so jumping ahead a little bit to your writing career in terms of beer, tell me about writing for you, Don. Have you written in any other fields or any other topics? I know you have a background in law, so I'm sure you're a very good writer. Where is writing fit in your life in the macro, not specifically just with beer?
So not a writer by training at all. I used to be a lawyer, and specifically I was a corporate lawyer. So I did push a lot of paper. I almost never appeared in court. But that's a different kind of writing. Legal writing is a skill, and it's a skill that a lot of people make fun of all the time. So writing for me was more a pursuit of my beer passion. And it's really just since I retired from law about 6 years ago that I've been writing more and actually began enjoying the writing process. For me, again, when I was writing before, it was more about enjoying the beer, and now in the last few years, I'm actually enjoying the writing more. And I never would have considered myself a writer 10 years ago. I would consider myself somebody who wrote about beer, but I'm starting to consider myself a writer now. But it's 90% of what I write is about beer. I've done some writing about spirits. I even wrote an article about champagne, and so it's all alcohol. It's all booze. I only write about booze.
There's a lot to cover.
Yes, there is.
We touched on this a little bit, but where can one find your written works, Don? You said you prefer the actual, like you prefer, what did you say? You said you preferred
printed media. Yeah.
Printed media. That's exactly what you said. Yes. So yeah, where can we find your work?
My regular writing gigs, there's a local publication here in Calgary called YY Scene. And so I do a monthly, and that's just local beer scene article. And then I write regularly for a industry focused magazine called the Brewing Industry Guide, published by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. It's an American publication. So I write a monthly article about yeast specifically. And then I pitch to the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine is a consumer facing magazine. So I'll pitch to my editor there, article ideas. So sometimes you'll see my writing there. Those wear magazines that you find in hotel rooms, I'll write for them. And then they have an upscale publication, a sister publication called Essential. That's where I wrote about champagne, because Essential is an upscale publication. I pitch all the time. There's a industry magazine called Poured, Poured. And so I just wrote an article about new barley varieties for them. And then, when they do publish that, and if there is an online edition of it, I'll put a link to it on my website, which is thedawnofbeer.com. But yeah, otherwise, it's just out there.
So how do you find these publications? Is it you being ambitious and reaching out to them? Is it them coming to you? Is it a bit of both? How does that work?
Yeah, now it's a bit of both. For the longest time, I probably spent at least 75% of my time pitching and only 25% of my time writing. And I just completely made up that number. I mean, it might have been 90-10 for all I know, but definitely more of my time was pitching than writing. But now that I have a couple of regular gigs, I'm pitching much less, and a few publications have actually found me, which is really exciting and flattering and cool, because pitching is not fun. You get a lot of rejection, but you don't even get rejection. You get silence is what you get.
Rejection can often be much better than just the silence, because you don't know, you're left out in the dark. Yeah. Well, so you said, okay, so you have this interesting sort of collection of different publications that you have periodical gigs with, monthly or weekly or what have you. Does that sort of spread all over particular facets of beer, or a little bit of alcohol as well? Or are you particularly fond of one component of beer? You said you write one article predominantly on yeast. Yeah. So that's obviously one of the four main ingredients of beer, but you also seem to be quite passionate now about different varieties of barley. So is it the whole rainbow of beer, Don? Is there a little bit more of it that tickles your fancy? What is it?
Yeast is particularly interesting to me right now. Because for the longest time, let me backtrack. I think to answer your question, I'm a beer passionate guy, and I got into writing to write about things that I was interested in. So if I'm going to ask brewers about their yeast, I may as well find a way to make some money doing it, which is writing about it. And so what I tend to write about is stuff that I'm just particularly interested in at that time. So I live in Alberta, one of the greatest barley growing regions in the world, at least for malt barley. And there's some cool things in terms of malt breeding for new barley varieties. We have 2 large malt houses in Alberta, that's Raw and Canada Malting, and we have 4 small ones, Origin, Red Shed, Hogarth, and 3D. And so there's really lots of cool things going on in barley and malt right now. So I love writing about that. And then yeast, for the longest time, brewers were always, I fermented my Belgian triple using the same yeast that Westmalle triple is fermented with, or I made this stout with the same yeast that Guinness fermented with. And brewers for the longest time were proud of the yeast tradition. And only, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years has there really been cool new interest in different new varieties of yeast. And why I'm particularly passionate about that is not just that it's new, but Canadian companies are leading this edge. I know you had on an earlier episode Richard Price from Escarpment, and then Lallemand is a Canadian company, and then there's a company in Vancouver called Renaissance Bioscience. I know I'm biased because I'm Canadian, but truly, I've interviewed yeast companies around the world. Truly, the Canadian companies are doing the coolest, most innovative things in brewing yeast, and that's super exciting to me. So I mentioned that I write for the Brewing Industry Guide. It's an American publication. And because it's an American publication, I put effort into interviewing American companies. I figure that's what the readers want to read about. But every time I start going down a yeast rabbit hole for an article I'm writing, I have to interview Richard Price again, because he's the one who's really doing the coolest thing of whatever esoteric topic about yeast I'm writing about. Richard is the guy, and I can't not talk to him. Like it's impossible. And I think that's really cool. I think that's in Guelph, Ontario, the forefront of brewing yeast in the world. I would argue is in Guelph, Ontario.
That 1 hour with Richard was certainly not enough. He's such a wealth of knowledge and such a brilliant guy, a very elegant speaker as well. Yeah,
now I'm going to geek out on this.
Please.
Everybody's probably heard of Kvik yeast. His Escarpment Labs, they released a Kvik yeast to make pseudo lagers, basically trying to make a lager faster. And their strain is called Crispy. And he used a technique called adaptive lab evolution to make Crispy better. And now there's a version called Crispy 2.0. He basically forced the yeast using adaptive lab evolution to evolve into something that could make lagers better than Crispy already did. And so this is really cool technology, and it's not limited to yeast. It's a common scientific process. And so I've talked to, I don't know, dozens of yeast companies around the world for different articles I've written. And if I think it kind of makes sense, I'll just ask them, like, how are you making these yeast strains? Have you looked at adaptive lab? And like, nobody's doing it. Richard is the only one of the dozens of people I've interviewed. Escarpment Labs is the only one using adaptive lab evolution. Now, probably some yeast company is going to listen to this and go, "No, we do it too." But I mean, nobody's ever talked about it other than Richard. It's really cool.
It does seem that the small yeast labs, there are a handful of them in Canada and the US. It does seem like it's a little more of a tight-knit community, not even a tight-knit community, more of a closed door community, actually, of each lab is kind of doing their own thing. It's not too collaborative outside of that. It's a little bit antithetical, what I found, and I could be totally wrong. I think we sort of spoke about this in about 5 minutes, so maybe I have this entirely fabricated or I have it the wrong way, but it seems sort of antithetical to what craft beer is going through, where craft breweries kind of are more willing to collaborate. They'll work together. Oh, I need I don't have a certain amount of space in my brewery, but okay, well, I'll go down the street to a brewery down there and they'll be able to let me use some of their tanks or what have you. It seemed really interesting. Just I don't know what it was. It just seemed from Richard's analysis that just sort of more of an
Yeah,
experimental,
the exception is Richard, though. The exception
yeah,
is Richard. Richard is very
yeah,
open about what he does.
yeah. He seemed to
Um,
be, but he sort of had a chip on his shoulder in terms of like no one else wants to share. I don't know.
oh,
That's what I found.
yeah, no, so what's incredible to me is he's very open about what he does, and he's doing
Mhm.
really cool things. So I find it amazing that there aren't other yeast lab companies doing what he's doing, because he's been successful with, it's not like he's some PhD guy in mad scientist,
Yeah.
with some crazy idea. Oh, I'm gonna try using adaptive lab evolution, and then he ends up with some Frankenstein weird thing. He's used adaptive lab evolution and made crispy 2.0, and was successful doing so. So you would think, and is open about how he did it. So you would think every other lab company around the world would look at that and go, huh, maybe we should try that.
Not yet.
Not
They're ahead
yet.
of the curve, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think it is, Don, about Canada being particularly on the forefront of yeast creation and yeast experimentation? Do you think there's some blatant reasons behind that? Are we just sort of in a perfect area of being next to the hegemonic power of beer being the United States, and we're just kind of feeding off that a little bit? What's your take?
No, I actually don't have a good answer for you on that. Yeah, I don't know. It's Richard. I don't know. I don't
That
know.
water in Guelph, Ontario. Just all
Um,
right. No, that's
I
fair.
was gonna try and say something like, Canada. I think we very often think of ourselves as underdogs,
Mm,
and we maybe are scrappier and fight a little harder. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily true.
mm.
At least in the yeast world. So no, I don't think I have a good answer for you.
Think about it, Don. And if
Yeah.
if you
Okay.
can get back to me, that's okay. I don't know either. Maybe it's a complicated question. Maybe it's not even a good question. So that's all right.
Yeah.
Tell me about a little bit more about beer in Alberta. Like you mentioned, very cool province in terms of the massive barley and malt industry that's
Yeah.
been in existence for what, a few hundred years
Yep.
going back. So
Yep.
they know what they're doing. Obviously, in that way, craft beer is huge, not only in the big sort of metropoles of Calgary and Edmonton, but all over the province you can find amazing craft beer. Can you expand a little bit on that? How do you find being a beer enthusiast in Calgary? Is it the best place to be in Canada, or maybe not?
I don't think it's the best place to be in Canada, but it's also the best place to be in Canada. I'm going to contradict myself in within one sentence. I think the future of beer is beer finding its place. So we talked about, supporting local, and I think that you're going to see more and more of that. I mean, we have 1,200 breweries in Canada right now, and the vast majority of them are doing similar things to each other in terms of, hazy IPA is really popular now, and kettle sour is really popular right now, and that's cool. I like those beers, but I think what you're going to see more and more is even more hyper local, um, fractionalization of the industry. So I think you're going to see more malt focused beers in Alberta, for example, where we have access to it. BC is already a very hop focused market because of their access to hops. Um, and sorry, I've lost track of your original question. Oh, you were asking about the Alberta beer industry generally. I think our beer in our province is a little bit more mature in terms of the number. We have about just under 140. I think it's 137 breweries in Alberta right now for a population of about under 4 million. It's quite a lot of breweries. And so I think we are starting to see some maturation of the industry in terms of breweries having to find a focus, which is where I think this is the point I was trying to make. Is I think breweries need to find their focus. Gone are the days when you can just open a brewery and make a good IPA and the world beats a path to your door. Those days are gone. And so in Alberta we have Jochen Farr, for example, Farr Brewing in Turner Valley. He's a German and he does everything as Reinheitsgebot compliant as he can. And his beers, he has a Hefeweizen and a Helles and a Pils, and very German focused. And if you
Yes.
want a German beer in Alberta, you can have his Far beers, and you'd be hard pressed to find a better German style beer brewed in Alberta than his. You either drink his or you drink the imports like the Hofbrauhaus that we import. And then in Edmonton, for example, they have Blind Enthusiasm, which they have two breweries. One is a all lager brewery, more culinary focused because it is a brew pub, part of a restaurant called Bira. And then they have the second brewery is all wild ferment. So either fermented in barrels, or the cool thing is it's a 3-story. The brewery is a 3-story building that they call the Monolith. And at the top of the 3rd floor, they have a room with a cool ship in it with louvered windows. And they pump the hot wort into it, open up the louvers, and the Edmonton night air brings in whatever microbes um, um, happen to be floating by, and they spontaneously ferment those beers. And nobody else, to my knowledge, nobody else is doing that in Canada. So that's cool, and it's early days for them. Not a lot of these beers require years of aging, so we haven't seen the best from them yet. But what I love is that the Alberta beer market is mature enough that we're doing cool things like that, having dedicated breweries doing things like that.
I want to ask you, Don, on how you stay up to speed with everything beer related. You seem very well connected with folks all over the country, in whether it be in yeast or in hops or in malting, as well as you seem pretty connected in the US. Obviously, you work for a publication in the United States as well. How do you stay up to speed on trends, on everything going on in this constantly expanding and changing market? Are you just sort of a beer nerd to the core and just do a lot of reading and just have your nose to the ground with everything that's going on, or is there a secret behind that?
No secret. It's just I'm just super passionate about it, and that's where I put my time. So I read tons of books about beer. I read every magazine, and I read scholarly articles about beer. It's just what I'm passionate about. So, I've had on a couple of occasions people have said to me, "Oh, I wish I had enough time to read that or whatever," or disparagingly they might say, "Oh, somebody has too much time on their hands." If somebody were to sit down, so in the hockey playoffs, the Battle of Alberta is on tonight. The Oilers are playing the Flames, right? And if somebody were to sit down and watch that hockey game for 3 hours, nobody goes, "Well, sure, it must be nice to have so much free time on your hands." But if I were to read a book, people will go, "Oh, sure, must be, nice to have so much free time on your hands." It's just a matter of what I like. That's what I do. So I will probably watch the hockey game too.
Maybe have a beer book in your hand
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about some of the articles or some of the publications that you've written that have been particularly that you are particularly fond of, that sort of shaped the way you thought of beer or really gave you some educational background, maybe just within the research of conducting the article. Or tell me about something or a few things that you've written that have really shaped your identity as a beer loving guy.
That's hard. Things I've written specifically?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things I'm most proud of is there used to be a publication called Ale Street News that is now unfortunately defunct. But I used to write a regular column for them where I would pair a beer or beer style with a work of art or an art movement. By art, I mean painting. And that was really cool because I'm an art fan myself. But also I liked the idea of elevating people's perception of beer as more than just a beverage. And to this day, I think of beer that way. And as an art lover, I also read books about art. And the whole time I'm reading books about art, I'm thinking about of beer analogies. And so if you want to understand me and my thinking of beer, you have to understand art and you have to appreciate it that way. And that's the way I think I write as well, is that even when I'm writing technical things about malt or yeast or whatever, I, I'm thinking of them as brushes for an artist to paint with, or pigments or whatever. So it's how I'm trying to tell the artist, the brewer, which I am not one, here's some new tools. What do you think about this? How can you evolve your art through these tools? Because even to use my Picasso example, if you look at Picasso's body of art, what he painted early in his career and what he painted late in his career are very different things. And so I like to think good brewers do think the same way. And I like to think that in my small way, I'm helping them, or at least making them think about different tools, different um, colors, different ideas. I don't know. I don't think I answered your question. I think I'm just rambling again.
No, that was good. For those of you, for those folks listening and not watching on YouTube, you would not see that Don has a beautiful painting behind him in his background. What is that? That's actually pretty familiar, Don. What is that?
Oh, this was actually in Calgary. There is it used to be called the Alberta College of Art. It's now called the University of Alberta Art and Design, or something like that. But they have a student art sale every year. And so I just bought this. It was painted by a student probably about 10 years ago. And I just liked it. So
Style looks very familiar. I'm not sure why.
maybe they're famous now and I just don't even know it.
That guy's face looks familiar. Anyways, well, okay. I love, and I couldn't agree more, that beer really is, maybe, I hesitate to say this, but I'll say it anyway, that maybe now more than ever, beer is more of an artistic expression, just with the massive amount, just the massive quantity going on, and the appreciation and the artisanship, the artisanry. Can't speak.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's true, because beer goes back thousands of years and it's always been attached to cultures, as well as there's been many hundreds and thousands of individuals who have poured their blood, sweat, and tears into beer. So it's probably not fair of me to say that now more than ever it's artistic, but I think maybe we appreciate it more as an artistic medium.
Yep.
Do you think that beer, Don, is always an artistic expression, or not necessarily?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
to build on what
go ahead,
you
yeah.
said, thousands of years ago, or in the world of art, tens of thousands of years ago, the first paintings weren't artistic per se. They were functional. It was teaching people how to surround a deer and spear it or whatever. And then painting then evolved into, the reason there's so much religious paintings is because when people were illiterate, it was a way to illustrate, religious stories and all that. So it served a functional purpose. And so beer, similarly, when beer was first invented, it wasn't artistic. It was beer is boiled and it's manufactured, so it was safe. It was functional. As society evolves, that's when painting evolved into an art form. And then I think now similarly, beer has evolved into an art form because we don't need cave paintings to instruct people anymore, because so many people are literate, we don't need paintings to illustrate anymore. And because water is safe, we don't need beer to serve its functional purpose anymore. Then the only place for art to go is for paintings to go is to become artistic. And the only place for beer to go is to become artistic. But even today, not all painting is artistic. Somebody painted the wall behind me, and I wouldn't say that's artistic. That was a functional purpose of putting a color on my wall. And there are brewers out there who they're just, not to pick on any, well, mass market lagers. Mass market lagers, I would not argue are artistic. very a lot of skill involved in them, but they don't move me. Those beers do not move me. They serve a purpose in terms of, if you're out with friends around a barbecue and you just want to have a beer, they serve that purpose just fine. But then there are the beers that move you. Like actually, you have a beer and you go like, wow, like I'm actually having an emotional reaction to it, and that's high art. And then that's so to me that's the future of beer.
What are the components of beer that you find particularly artistically worthwhile? Is it the taste, the smell, the aroma, the little bit of alcoholic effects that is evoked in us all when we drink, or is it the whole collection?
Yeah, it's the whole collection, including the packaging, the artwork, and again, to use my not to hammer too hard on the art analogy, the painting analogy. A painting can be enhanced by its frame, or there's a lot of modern art is unframed, and that's purposeful. Those are decisions that are made when it's hung on a wall. Curation is an art form. Lighting of a painting is an art form, and so glassware is what I would call lighting of beer, if that makes sense. And then if you have a beer one evening, the way you enjoy that beer is fundamentally different than if you go to a bottle share and have 10 sips of 10 different beers. And neither of those is more valid than the other. But the analogy would be, looking at a painting versus going to an art gallery. And the way you enjoy a painting in an art gallery is different than you would enjoy that painting in your own home. And so all of that with beer, to answer your question, it's everything. It's the glass, it's the can it came in, the label, the aroma, the color, it's all. And science backs me up on this, by the way. I'm just nerding out again. They've done fMRI scans on people as they're enjoying beers, and whether they serve it from a can or serve it from a bottle, not only will people say they enjoy it differently, the fMRI scans show that they actually do enjoy it differently. So everything matters. It all matters, and that's what I love about beer. There's no end to it.
Yeah, it doesn't stop, does it?
No.
Don, can you enlighten us a little bit on writing projects or articles you have on the go right now? What's particularly in vogue for you in the next month or two? What are you working on?
So my two big, I monthly column about yeast, and then for another publication, I'm also writing about yeast, and again with the whole Canadians are leading the charge angle. So I'm very excited about that. I recently wrote, it hasn't been published yet, but I recently submitted an article about new new barley varieties. I'm super excited about that because I think people don't understand the reason Alberta is so famous for their barley is because it grows a particular type of barley that is sought by brewers today. Copeland and Metcalfe are the two big ones. Synergy is the third one. They are grown here. I'm not articulating myself very well. The reason Alberta is famous for their barley is because those three barley varieties are sought, and those three barley varieties grow well here. But there's no reason why small breweries should seek those three barley varieties. In fact, an argument can be made that craft brewery, they're not good for craft breweries. So if we move away from Copeland, Metcalfe, and Synergy, and there's research now, there's breeding now going into different barley varieties that are better for craft brewers, then those barley varieties might be able to be grown in Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, where Texas, Florida, Brazil, whatever. And so I wrote an article about how new barley varieties might change farming because nobody in Ontario grows barley now, but they might, or at least not malting barley. Sorry, they do grow some peat barley. Nobody in Ontario grows malting barley now, but they might. And I think that's cool. That might revive, everybody's read about how farm communities are dying, small towns are dying. What if it doesn't have to happen? What if farms could be revived and then small communities could be revived because of Ontario breweries being interested in brewing with Ontario barley? Wouldn't that be cool? I think that's cool.
It sounds very cool to me. Well, Don, we're coming up on our hour mark here. A quick question for you. Who's winning the hockey game tonight?
I'll tell you that the Flames will win the series. Who's going to win the
Okay.
game tonight? I don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a good
I'm not
prediction.
willing to say it's going to be a 4-game sweep, but like 5 games maximum.
Okay. I'm impressed. Yeah. I guess this episode will be out in a few days. So those of
God.
you listening, will be interesting to see if Don's predictions come true. Any final remarks, Don, on your love of beer, on the future of beer? I always like to ask craft brewers or folks in the beer community any like 5-year predictions that you have for the entire industry, maybe some good predictions, some maybe predictions that are not so positive. Any final remarks for you, sir?
So I would say contrary to what a lot of people think in terms of market saturation, I don't think so. I think we got a lot of runway still. But I think the future is being more focused, local, and innovative. And so everybody knows about hops and how sexy they are. The new sexy will be in yeast in the short term. Just the nature of the way barley is bred and the research that has to go behind it, that won't happen in 5 years. But I think 50 years from now, you will see a thriving barley and malting industry in Ontario, Florida, Texas, as I was mentioning. Yeah, watch the space, and yeah, the only thing, this is going to sound preachy, but I would just ask beer drinkers to look beyond what's in their glass and really think about all the stuff that goes behind it. And I mean, it'll suck up your life, like it has for me. Maybe that's a warning. Maybe people shouldn't look beyond their glass.
Yep, I can definitely relate for sure. Well, the Dawn of Beer, Don, Tess, really appreciate your time and all your insights. I've definitely learned a lot, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Oh, I hope to meet you in person someday.
Absolutely. Don, thank you
Cheers.
so much. Have a great evening.
Have a great evening.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.